Right, hi everyone. Yes, tonight's stream is something slightly different. It isn't just about the Manson murders. It's about trying to understand why people behave the way they do in extreme situations. We're not here to excuse what happened. The crimes were horrific. But turning these women into monsters was easier than asking the harder questions, like what led them to act that way and why did they seem so cold in court. Their mental illness, derealization, trauma, drug-induced psychosis, may not have been properly understood at the time, but it was used to make them look inhuman, to sell a cleaner narrative, and possibly to distract from even worse things happening elsewhere. And so this stream is for people who want to go deeper than just the true crime headlines and look for deeper answers. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here for it. And in the coming weeks, I'll be examining the political backdrop, what was happening in Vietnam, Cambodia, and the United States, and how the Manson trial may have helped conceal some uncomfortable truths. But don't worry, I will also be returning to the Brotherhood of Eternal Love and Ron Stark and Terry the Tramp, etc. shortly as well. So yes, hello everyone. This I was going to do like a smaller stream, but this sort of turned into a rabbit hole. I found a load of other things. It's something I've wanted to look at for years. What other events were going on as the trial happened that they might have been trying to distract from, and there's a lot of them, all of them related to the Vietnam War. So I'm going to be covering that in the next couple of weeks as well. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and obviously gang coercion comes into it as well. Like I say, I'm going to start the presentation pretty quickly, just get straight into it, and then we'll stop for a little discussion break, and then I'll carry on and talk about the gang coercion aspect. So yeah, stick around for both parts of the presentation at least. yeah, and like I say, it's slightly different angle because this isn't more not about the crimes. It's about examining why they acted like they did, basically, as they went into court. And I've also got like a bit more of a timeline of that footage that's in the Manson Shadows video, like exactly what day this was. This was all like as the penalty phase was coming to the end, and they were getting sentenced to death and all stuff like this, the way they were acting. But I'll show you that right at the end of the presentation. Right, so just a different lens. Why did the Manson girls walk into court laughing and singing? Were they evil or profoundly unwell? This stream explores how trauma can present in strange and shocking ways, how the legal system and media failed to recognise this and still do, how these women became symbols used to distract the public from political crises like the Vietnam War. So yes, and like I say, I'm surprised in more recent documentaries they don't talk about this aspect more, but it's more true criming when they're talking about the case. They don't talk about angles like this. Mental illness as a spectacle. The girls' trauma and illness was not hidden like Charles Tex Watson's was. It was televised. Their symptoms, laughing, blank expressions, detachment, were turned into theatre. Monsters was easier to sell than mentally unwell young women. The truth, these were classic signs of dissociation, PTSD, and coercive control. Because yes, well, Tex was hidden from view a lot more, wasn't he, than the girls? The girls were put on display more. And Tex got to go into a mental hospital and all that for a while before he got tried, but the girls didn't. They were just thrust in front of the cameras. PTSD symptoms in courtroom behaviour. Right, and these are a few symptoms of PTSD. Now, it's notoriously difficult to describe how these things feel, but I'm going to attempt to try. Right, derealization. It's feeling like events aren't real or are dreamlike. That's a really important one. We're going to talk about that more. Dissociation, emotional numbness, and blank stares. Blunted affect, seeming emotionless or indifferent in the way you're behaving, a blank facial expression and body language. Hyper-compliance as well, which is obedience stemming from fear, common in abusive relationships, cults and gangs. These symptoms were misunderstood as callousness or cruelty. Right, and so derealization feels like being in a dream, maybe. Dissociation is mentally checking out. Blunted affect is no emotion visible. And hyper-compliance is obeying out of fear. Other ways of putting it. So very difficult, though, to explain how these things feel. And derealization is the most important one for this case. What's going on with why they acted the way they did. What is derealization? A trauma response where the world feels unreal or dreamlike. Victims seem robotic, disconnected or unfazed. They're mentally somewhere else. So when Susan Atkins was saying things like she sounded like a computer and she looked like a mannequin about Sharon, this is derealization. She wasn't just being cold and callous. She was shutting down and separating herself from the situation that seemed unreal to her. And in Krenwinkel's trial testimony on stabbing Abigail Folger, she said, "I stabbed her and I kept stabbing her." When asked how it felt, Krenwinkel replied, "Nothing. I mean, what is there to describe? It was just there and it was right." This response indicates a profound emotional numbness and detachment from the violent act, characteristic of derealization, often confused with psychopathy, but it's the opposite, an overwhelmed brain protecting itself. Basically, your brain shuts down. And it's like really hard to describe. If you ask someone, if you know someone is there in front of you experiencing derealization, and you ask them what does it feel like, they just say nothing. And so that's when she's saying she didn't feel anything when she did it. She's describing what derealization feels like. And other examples, imagine watching a video of yourself doing something terrible and not recognizing the person in the video. Or it feels like it's being trapped in a dream where you're just going through the motions. It's not coldness, it's shutdown. And it happens to war veterans, trauma survivors, and cult members. It just wasn't understood as well back then in the 70s when this case was happening. We'll break a minute for discussion there. But this is something you may have experienced yourself if you've ever been in something like a car accident. And in the minutes after it has happened, you feel like everything feels unreal and you're floating above yourself or something like that. That's derealization when you've had a trauma, basically. And the girls were going through this, basically. So I know this is hard to get your head around, but people can actually get PTSD from committing murders. They have to separate themselves from it. They compartmentalize it, and part of their brain shuts down. It's PTSD. And the understanding of this wasn't as deep in the 70s, basically, so it went unnoticed. Yeah. And they exploited it to make them look like monsters because that's easier to sell than these girls are mentally unwell. Yeah. Yeah. Compartmentalized. Yeah. Dissociation. Yeah, that's just mentally blanking out from it. But derealization is the one when she's saying all these things about she felt nothing as she was doing it. She's describing derealization, but it sounds like she's a psycho. It's like, you know, when you read it at face value, it sounds really shocking, doesn't it? But she was actually, it's her mind brain shutting down her emotion to protect herself, basically. It's, yeah. Dissociation is a mental process of disconnecting from one's thoughts, feelings, and memories, or sense of identity, yes. And we get further into this as well when we talk about the gang and trauma bonding in the next couple of slides. Yeah. You have childhood PTSD, do you? Yeah. I have complex PTSD myself, yeah. So this has been just another reason I put off talking about this, because it's quite distressing for me to talk about it. Yeah, nothing as bad as what these girls had, you know, but yeah, I've got the same illness that they're displaying here, yeah. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's hard to describe the symptoms. Like I say, that's what I was explaining to you there, trying to explain what derealization feels like. Yeah, but it literally feels like nothing. It's characterized, and dissociation as well. It all feels like nothing. You're feeling nothing, sort of thing. And the blunted affect when they're doing the cold facial expression. Well, laughing as well, that's another thing. People in war actually talk about this. They start laughing after they've just killed people in war and stuff like that. That is a trauma response as well. Should mention that one since it's in the title. Yeah, it is. It's very hard to explain how it feels. Yeah, borderline personality disorder. I think she may have had fetal alcohol syndrome as well. Her mother drank while she was pregnant with her, and that causes behavior problems and acting out, and can cause the hypersexuality, you know, like the high libido she had and stuff like that. Look into that. I really think she might have had fetal alcohol syndrome. And Charles Manson, actually, if you look at Charles Manson as well. Yeah. I'll carry on with the next couple of slides anyway. And like I say, I'm not trying to make excuses for their behaviour or anything. This is just for people that want to know, you know, deeper answers, not just the true crime explanation. If these things haunt you, what's the explanation for why she acted this way? There is, you know, in relation to PTSD. Derealization. Gang coercion and trauma bonding. Why did they go back for the second night? Why so loyal to Manson? Trauma bonding is loyalty to an abuser developed through cycles of fear and love. Gang logic, disobedience equals threats, beatings, or social or even physical death. They will kill you if you don't comply. Many were conditioned to comply. Violent acts were not an expression of rage, but of obedience and survival. Parole hearing reflection on personal transformation from Krenwinkel. I committed myself fully to him. I committed myself to the act of murder. I was willing to sacrifice others' lives for my own. These statements reflect a past mindset where her personal identity and morality were subsumed under Manson's influence, leading to actions carried out with a detached sense of self. As well as gang coercion, she feared she would be killed if she did not comply. Basically. And yeah, and don't try and say she didn't fear she'd be killed. Imagine if Abigail Folger got away and she'd had to walk up to Tex on the lawn after he's just finishing stabbing Frykowski 44 times. She's got to say, oh, sorry, Tex, she got away. She's got to the next house. She's calling the police. We're all screwed. Do you think she wasn't scared that Tex was going to kill her if she didn't stop Abigail Folger? You know, it was a gang violent situation. They were acting under fear. Doesn't excuse it, but yeah, still, it is a reason, you know. Oh, sunk cost fallacy. Why Krenwinkel stayed loyal. Now, I just threw this in for people who wonder about why she stayed with him so long. Like I say, I'm not trying to excuse anything, but this is just for people that want to know. If you've never heard of this, this is a reason. It's when you talk about abusive relationships and why women stay in abusive relationships. The sunk cost fallacy. Why Krenwinkel stayed loyal. Patricia didn't renounce Manson until the 1990s. Why? Krenwinkel didn't just fall in love. She cut ties with her family, she lived in poverty, and she committed murder. She gave up her identity, her morality, her freedom for him. At that point, leaving Manson wasn't just scary, it meant admitting that everything she'd done was for nothing. In abusive dynamics, this is called the sunk cost fallacy. I've given up so much already, I might as well keep going. It doesn't make her innocent, but it does make her human. So, yeah, and like normally you talk about like a marriage, where you don't leave the man because he's the father of you. But this is a very, very extreme version of that. But it's like if she renounced Manson, then she's got to admit to herself that she did all that for nothing. You know, it was all. So yeah, but it's you stay in the abusive relationship because you've committed so much already. It's you've invested so much you don't want to leave. And I just threw that in for people who might be interested. Yeah. Right, and the trial is a distraction. The trial was a media circus and not by accident. June 1970 was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution repeal. So that's like the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was the act that let them start the Vietnam War, obviously. And Congress pulled back war powers after the invasion of Cambodia and the Kent State shootings. But the public barely noticed as they were too distracted by the start of the Manson trial. Because just as this happened, the Manson trial started. And in August of 1970, so during the Manson trial, the Chicano Moratorium, which was a big protest march by people of that race, and there was a violent police crackdown, which left 3 people dead. And then on January 31st through to February the 2nd, which is just as the penalty phase starts in 1971, the Winter Soldier investigation, which is where a load of soldiers got together and exposed Vietnam War atrocities. And I'm going to cover that next week. It'll be something different. There'll be a premiere of a video first that we'll watch, and then it will divert you to a live stream and we'll discuss it. But yeah, it's really shocking. And it was ignored by the media because they were looking at the Manson case. Headlines about the Manson girls singing in court often eclipse these events. Very shocking. So yeah, final thoughts. They laughed because they were broken, not evil. Their symptoms were exploited to terrify the public. They were also used to distract from other disturbing political events occurring at the same time. They became symbols, not people. And justice must evolve with our understanding of trauma. As it has, like women who've committed similar crimes more recently have actually been let out because there's a greater understanding of trauma and gang coercion and that now. And these women have been left like this because when they were convicted, there wasn't enough understanding of this sort of thing. And the media just it carries on with they're monsters. Don't look any further than that narrative, sort of thing. You know, so that's all you need to know for an explanation. But it's not true, is it? Really, there's actually a lot to their behaviour. It doesn't excuse what they did, but it's a reason, and it needs to be discussed and brought up because it's part of the truth. You know? Yeah, yeah, coercive control as well from Manson. And like I say, people tried to say that she wasn't scared. Krenwinkel wasn't scared, but you imagine that. What do you think? She wasn't scared of Tex? What Tex would do to her if she didn't do what he told her to? You know, of course she was scared. They were all scared. And you get Susan saying she was terrified when she was sat with Sharon. Her and Sharon were both terrified. They were all scared. You know. And Gypsy, in the recent documentary, Making Manson, you get Gypsy saying she was outside the court because she was terrified, you know. And you hear Ella J. Bailey saying it got scary and that they were scared they'd be killed and all this sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So let's look at the chat for a second. And there's this final diagram. I didn't have time to do text for it because it just came from Mike. But look, you can see the visible decline of them. Right, so January 25th, this is in the Manson Shadows video. The guilty verdict, that's when they've been told it is guilty, the verdict. And then on March the 24th of 1971, the penalty phase is nearing its conclusion. So you've just had them saying all the cold things about how they felt separate from what was happening. You know? And then March the 29th, 1971, the death sentence verdicts is read to them. You can see they're still laughing there. But the officially sentenced to death on the April of 20th, 1971 day, this is when they've carved the X's into their foreheads as well. They're not laughing in this, and I've actually got a 5-second clip of this that I didn't include in the Manson Shadows videos. So I'll have to re-edit it again now to include this clip. This is the day they were told that they were going to get sentenced to death. See, why do they all tug their ears? Watch. They all do the same thing. They all tug their ear. Hit the wrong video, sorry. Weird. Yeah, just keep that on the screen because you can see how they get worse in the hair. Is gradually they're cutting their hair off. Finally, they've shaved their heads. Some women, particularly within the counterculture or feminist movement, shaved their heads as a symbolic act of rebellion against traditional beauty standards and societal expectations. Don't think that was what this was about, though, was it? No, I think it was. Didn't Manson do it? So they all just did it because Manson did it. I'm not sure exactly what they meant by shaving their hair off. Yeah, I don't think it was a feminist statement, though, was it? In their case. Yeah. At that early age, living something so intense as they were is like it was their whole world, and they were so young. People seem to underestimate how young they were as well. You know, they talk about them like they were women in their 30s that should have known better, but these women were young, you know, and they were subjected to quite a lot of abuse as well. So yeah, time to scroll all the way down. But yes, it's more as to say, yeah, and like I say, at the time in the 70s, there wasn't as much understanding of trauma. So it wasn't just like the media were mean and or whatever, and they just ignored it and they wanted to cover up the fact these girls have PTSD. There wasn't as much of an understanding of it as there was back then. Though they did know about drug-induced psychosis and that, and I think that they should have given them the same treatment that Tex had, so they shouldn't have been put in front of the cameras at this time. But they wanted to use the trial as a distraction. They wanted to distract from why it really happened as well. They wanted you to just think it happened in a bubble and Manson was crazy and his girls were crazy and they just did it independently. Sort of seal it up in a little box, you know. They didn't want you to think about it too much. And it's easier than to sit and think about it, isn't it? You know, people just want to believe, all right, they were monsters, so they did that. Keep them locked up, never think about them. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, she was what? They were all, none of them were older than 21 when they were in court. That is young, come on. They're 18, 19 when they're actually doing it. Yeah, and Linda was already a hardened criminal. Susan arguably was as well, wasn't she? Yeah. But that is young. Still, you can't say that isn't young. They were only like 18 or 19 when they met him and they were going through all this. Yeah, that's it. It didn't even exist in the way that we know it now in that at that time. So I think they did know about dissociation and stuff like that, but yeah, they weren't. It wasn't, as well understood as it is now. But they definitely knew about drug-induced psychosis, and that was what Tex got uh, deemed insane because of. But the girls seem to like not be. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's it. Trauma bonding is a strong emotional attachment formed between an abuser and the person they abuse, often in cyclical abusive relationships. And these people, it was a big relationship, wasn't it? So it's not like when you normally talk about these things in a relationship between only two people. There was a lot of people involved. And these girls were getting turned out, pimped to bikers, and bikers aren't pleasant to sleep with, you know what I mean? They're not nice. They weren't having fun, you know. Yeah, 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 that's it. I've heard that as well, that they got LSD in court. And it was in there sewn into the hems of the dresses, yeah. So they were tripping at some points, yeah. So it was probably also why they were laughing, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it might be quite a short one tonight. But I just wanted to get it out of the way because it's something I've wanted to talk about for years. And like I said, I'm going to develop this next week. And yeah, tune in for the winter soldier investigation thing because that's really shocking. It's young men the same age as the Manson girls who got back from Vietnam, and they're talking about the atrocities they had to commit, and they were forced to do it, or they get court-martialed if they didn't obey their orders and that sort of thing. I'm going to have to edit parts of the video so you don't see the photos of the bodies and stuff like that, but I will show it, and then there'll be a live stream to react to it. But that was happening right as the penalty phase was starting, and it got ignored by the media because of the Manson girl. Yeah, yeah. And they cast kites, didn't they? And Manson was allowed to talk to them when he was representing himself. He actually met with Susan and stuff like that, right? Manson represented himself. There's footage of him standing outside the court without handcuffs talking to the reporters when he was representing himself. It's absolutely crazy, this trial. And these things called kites, the notes that they pass in prison. That's how they get, yeah, information from prison out. And pass a message to someone who's getting released the next day and shit like that. That's how they do it, isn't it? But between prisons, it would have to be through kites, the notes getting passed, wouldn't it? Yeah. Like I say, it's a difficult subject to talk about, but it's shocking that it doesn't get talked about more at this stage, that people aren't picking up more on this. But like I say, generally when this is getting talked about by the media, it's the true crime aspects and how horrific the crimes were. They're not looking at it from this perspective, so it's hard to say. Hard for them to cover this. But yeah, people need to talk about it, and it's, like I say, shocking what it was distracting from, the things that were happening at the time, and the political backdrop, so I want to talk more about that. And yeah, the Kent State shootings, that was when the National Guard killed a load of Vietnam War protesters. And it ties in because the Manson girls were saying stuff about the Vietnam War in the penalty phase. And Krenwinkel said when they asked her why she carved war into Lino, she said, "You won't be sending your son to war." What she was thinking when she wrote that on Lino. God, that sort of thing. But it all connect to the Vietnam War, and there's other connections. Yeah, that's it. And next week, yes, because it's disturbing stuff, and obviously the training that the soldiers went through as well. This is what the winter soldier thing was about. They talk about the dehumanization training, and they're angry about it. These men, they didn't like it, obviously, and they talk about how they were forced to, act that way and conditioned to see the enemy as less than human and stuff like that, because they do that because you're less likely to get PTSD from killing them if you see them as less than human, whereas quickly you won't get it as quickly as they dehumanize the enemy. God, yeah, it's horrible. But men who'd had that training were doing tours in Vietnam and then just getting let go and then going and becoming bikers. And we know that at least two of the men at Spun Ranch, Zero and TJ, had done tours in Vietnam. So they had this dehumanization training. So like, this. part of what made them act the way they did. Were they hearing from soldiers that had this terrible training that we gave the soldiers for Vietnam? And what did they see when they were in Vietnam? Because you hear about the horrible things they were having to do. Yeah, God. Yeah. Sorry, I need a sip of coffee. Too close to the camera. Oh, I haven't got any coffee left. Right. This would be a really short stream if I end it now. But I suppose I could end it now and just go to an after show. Because, yeah, it's one, I've got everything I said, wanted to say quite quickly. So hopefully people will see the whole thing. Because, yeah, it is, like I say, just something that isn't talked about enough. Aspect of this case, the fact that the girls obviously have PTSD. In fact, text does as well. I was thinking about this as I was walking around. Text is showing extreme derealization the whole time, everything he says. And still now, basically, yeah. And that's it, yeah. It was to divert attention away from the horror on TV and to divert away from the fact that the American government had taken thousands of young men and trained them to be murderers and set them loose on people in Vietnam. And they killed many more people than the Manson family killed. Do you know what I mean? It's really quite a horrific thing to think about, you know. And they were trying to cover up they'd done that by exploiting these girls and men that had killed a few people, basically. It's mad. Yeah. Oh, is it the first one you made it to? I'll try not to end it too soon then. Thank you for coming. I say this is slightly different because it's not about the true crime aspect. It's actually studied psychology. And this, broadly speaking, is psychology, sociology, and history that we're talking about tonight. I don't like to mention it because people think they're learning something and click away. You know, I don't want to feel like you to feel like I'm teaching you something. But yeah, I hope I can make some people think slightly differently about these girls anyway. But I think most of the people that are here probably already have an inkling about this side of it. So yeah, one or two people. Yeah. Change their opinion even slightly about these girls because, like I say, I'm not saying, "Oh, that's all right, then let them go." If they, just this is another reason why they acted so cold. It wasn't because they were monsters. And even when you see Leslie years later at parole hearing, still sounding really cold, that's because she still copes with it through derealization when she's remembering it. So that's why she sounds so detached from the memories because she had derealization. And by the 90s, there was a better understanding of this, so Pat Krenwinkel would have been given the right sort of therapy by then. And that's why she starts to get better in the 90s. But before then, there really wasn't a lot of understanding of trauma. It started to get better in the 80s and the 90s, basically, yeah. Yeah, I've got a degree in Doyleology, yeah, now. Yeah, yeah. All right, yeah, we'll just be going for 30 minutes now. Yeah, I will. I'll keep this one short because then hopefully people will at least watch the whole of the thing. And give me 5 minutes. I need to make myself another drink and walk about a bit. And I'll do an after show. But there's a big audience here today. Yeah, thank you all for coming. And like I say, wait for the notification. I'll probably be about 5 minutes. And we'll do a after show. Okay. Right, thanks for coming. I'll see you in a few minutes.